stand on the big white spot. Just there's the left.
Another potential U-turn from Donald Trump. Now he says there is some connection between humans and climate change after calling it a Chinese hoax during the election campaign. Hello and welcome to TRT World. Live from Istanbul, I'm Marlene Saeed. Also ahead on the programme. Members of the European Parliament call on the EU to abandon accession talks with Turkey. Efforts to bring an end to Colombia's decades-long conflict hit yet another stumbling block. And the Iraqi army steps up its offensive against Daesh in Mosul. US President-elect Donald Trump has been meeting with journalists from the New York Times at Trump Tower, and his comments suggest a possible departure from his previous position on a few issues. He suggested that humans now play some role in climate change and that he's keeping an open mind on the Paris climate deal. During his campaign, of course, he said he might cancel the deal. Earlier, he announced on Facebook that he would withdraw the US from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal on the first day of his presidency.
On trade, I am going to issue our notification of intent to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a potential disaster for our country. Instead, we will negotiate fair bilateral trade deals that bring jobs and industry back onto American shores.
So what exactly is the TPP and what will a possible US exit mean? Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership has been envisaged as the largest free trade area in the world. It involves big economies like the United States, Japan, and 10 other countries, including Australia, Malaysia, and Canada. Together, they represent nearly 40% of the global economy, similar to that of the European Union. Well, the deal is designed to make huge changes in trade between member countries by cutting tariffs. A final proposal was signed in February, but the treaty is yet to be ratified before it can enter into force, and it seems Trump has no intention of doing that. Well, President Barack Obama has responded to the announcement made by Trump, saying that he thinks he's making a mistake.
I believe that TPP is a plus for America's economy, America's workers, American jobs. I think not moving forward would undermine our position across the region, our ability to shape the rules of global trade in a way that reflects our interests and our values.
Well, Trump may have lived up to his pledge on free trade, but on some other issues, he's starting to look a little shaky. Let's go to Colin Campbell, who is live in Washington, D.C. for us. Colin, so let's talk about climate change, because Trump has made quite a bit of a backtrack on his comments on climate change in the last hour or so.
Most definitely. This is something that he has talked about, saying was a very contrived environment from China or some left-wing scientists. He really debunked a lot of the theories involving climate change and what people were saying about it and the long-term implications, especially when it came to what the Obama administration had been saying about it. Now, part of this is because of Donald Trump's ideology when it comes to what would spur job growth in the country, what would create more jobs and also open up some of the oil and coal markets. Of course, if he was to totally buy into climate change and show that he was a 100% supporter of climate change, then it would seem rather hypocritical for him to open up more drilling, to open up the coal industry, to open up some of those industries that many have said actually bring more damage to the environment. So we saw him backtrack on that. Of course, during the interview in which he talked about climate change. That wasn't supposed to happen almost several hours ago when he canceled the interview with New York Times, but then rescheduled it. So again, this is something that he has sort of backtracked on a bit. Also, when it comes to his formal rival for the presidency, Hillary Clinton, there were many supporters, Donald Trump supporters, who said lock her up, and he talked about trying to prosecute her or opening up a criminal investigation once he was in office. Well, now he's saying he doesn't want to bring any more harm to the Clintons. And he says that it's not something that he feels very strongly about, pursuing a criminal investigation when it comes to Hillary Clinton's private email server or her email. So this is just another, but of many issues that President-elect Trump has had to curb quite a bit now that he realizes he's just months away from, or rather weeks away from becoming president of the United States, and he has to look at all of these issues not just as a campaign trail issue, but actually as an American issue and a presidential issue.
Okay, Colin, good to speak to you. Colin Campbell there for us live in Washington, D.C. Members of the European Parliament have called on the EU to halt membership talks with Turkey. The leaders of the Parliament's two largest groups say security measures adopted since an attempted coup in July are against European values. The Turkish government dismissed 15,000 civil servants on Tuesday alone. They've accused them of having ties to terror groups like the PKK or being followers of US-based cleric and businessman Fethullah Gulen. Well, all this comes on the same day the Turkish authorities ordered the arrests of 48 members of the PYD group in connection with February's bomb attack in Ankara, which killed 29 people. Salih Muslim, the co-president of the PKK-linked PYD, is one of those named in the warrants. John Brain reports.
This was Salih Muslim in Paris last November, paying tribute to the victims of the terror attacks which killed 130 people. But he's now being accused of involvement in a terrorist atrocity himself. The authorities in Turkey want to question him in connection with February's deadly attack in Ankara. 29 people were killed and dozens injured when a car packed with explosives was blown up next to army buses near the military headquarters. Muslim denies being involved. TAK, an offshoot of the PKK, claimed responsibility. And the PYD is the Syrian wing of the PKK. Salih Muslim, seen here at Cambridge University on Monday, is the co-president of the PYD. He's not thought to have been in Turkey since 2015. He makes frequent trips to Brussels, which Turkey has recently accused of harboring terrorists.
Turkey is trying, by issuing this warrant, to put all its alliance, whether in the West, I mean in the European Union or in the United States, in front of their responsibilities. They should be accountable, and they should know that if you're interested in fighting terrorists, you cannot be picky when selecting the terrorists you're going to fight.
It's not clear at this stage whether prosecutors will apply for a European arrest warrant. Such a move would be a test of Turkey's relationship with the international community. John Brain, TRT World.
At least 6 people have been killed and dozens more injured in airstrikes in eastern Aleppo on Tuesday. That's according to the Syrian Civil Defense. This is the 490th instance of the Syrian regime bombing the city over the past week. Rebels in the city say they're holding their positions against fierce assaults by regime forces on the ground. In neighboring Iraq, the army is expanding its control of the eastern districts of Mosul. But seizing territory from Daesh is only part of the battle. The other is making those areas safe. TRT World's Zaina Awad has been in the neighborhood of Al-Arbajiyah and has this story about the people who live there and why their lives are still far from normal.
It's been a little over a week since Daesh was driven out of Al-Arbajiyah. The neighborhood bears the scars of the 2 long years it spent under the group's control. We visited it with the Golden Brigade, Iraq's elite soldiers trained by the US. The brigade's local commander turned the house of the former Daesh intelligence chief into his base. The Daesh chief had lived here with his wife and children. But the house now houses 9 Iraqi soldiers.
We want to liberate this area so that we can return to our families and no longer have to worry about having Daesh in our country, so that we can be at peace.
This is a Daesh newspaper, and when you go through it, you see that it actually reports on international and local issues. For example, here there's an article about a suicide bomber. In here there's an article about the PKK, and over here about US aerial strikes. And this is the only source of information that people here had in many cases because they were banned from having satellite TV or any outside publications. People here are just beginning to reconnect with the outside world. Many haven't had a job in years. We need everything, this man tells us. We need aid, medical facilities, food, and water. Daesh tightly restricted what came in and out of this area and subjected people to untold atrocities. Many are still too terrified to speak in public about what happened here. And when the Iraqi army started its push on Mosul, Daesh cracked down even more. Ahmed, not his real name, didn't want his face to appear on television. He told us Daesh turned his house into a small base a few days before the Iraqi army stormed the neighborhood.
They forced me to leave. I told them, I have children. What am I supposed to do? They said, you must go away. Religion is more important than you. You either shut up or we kill you. So I was forced to leave my house.
Ahmed says he came back the following day to check on his cow that he had left behind. But a few minutes before he entered his front yard, an airstrike destroyed his home. We returned to the commander's base to say goodbye. But as we prepared to leave, this happened. They've just spotted something in the sky, and they believe that it's a Daesh drone that's sent out here for surveillance. We have to go? We have to go. A reminder that despite Al-Arabajiyya being cleared of Daesh, the front line is still very close. Zaina Awad, TRT World, Mosul, Iraq.
Coming up on the program, as the comparisons fly from those trying to get a handle on President-elect Trump, we talk to one person who says we need to look to the leaders of Central Asia to understand Trump better. And a new peace deal between Colombia's government and FARC rebels hits another roadblock. Welcome back to TRT World. A reminder of our top stories. Members of the European Parliament have called on the EU to halt membership talks with Turkey. The leader of the Parliament's two largest groups say security measures adopted since an attempted coup in July go against European values. Turkish prosecutors have issued arrest warrants for the party leader of the PYD, Salih Muslim, along with 47 other people. Prosecutors accuse them of being connected to a bombing in Ankara earlier this year. US President-elect Donald Trump has suggested he could stand by the Paris Climate Agreement, despite saying he might cancel it during his campaign. However, he has pledged to withdraw from the trade deal known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership on the first day of his presidency. Now, Donald Trump's comments on minorities and press freedom have prompted comparison with some of history's most notorious leaders. One writer, Sarah Kendzior, has likened the US president-elect to authoritarian leaders in Central Asian countries. She joins us now live from St. Louis in Missouri. Many thanks for joining us, Sarah. So tell us a bit about this comparison to autocrats from Central Asia. Why do you choose this comparison?
Well, I've been comparing Trump to these leaders all along. The primary dictatorship that I've studied is Uzbekistan, and as his campaign went on, I noticed many similarities in terms of how he manages the media, in terms of his use of spectacle. And I think the most important one now that he is the actual president-elect is the kleptocracy that you see not only in Central Asia, but in authoritarian regimes around the world, in which the state is based, and the nation is basically used as resources to be stripped down for parts to benefit the family and the lackeys and the people closest to the person in power. And if you look at the sort of trade deals and other deals that the president-elect is making, you see that kind of kleptocracy in action. He wants to privatize things. He has a lot of foreign arrangements that are a bit suspicious. He won't release his tax returns, so we don't know exactly what his financial situation is. It's very, not transparent. He also, in addition to the kleptocracy, is endorsing a number of very repressive policies, including a registry for Muslims. There's been a rise in hate crimes that has happened throughout his campaign, but has really taken off since he's, won the election. And I think that these are all things that we should watch out for, because we've seen this pattern in current affairs and we've seen it throughout history, and it doesn't end well.
We have seen today some of his rhetoric softening on certain policies that he talked about very differently during the election campaign. For example, climate change, for example, how he would persecute Hillary Clinton, his running mate. He seems to have changed tact on that. Do you think you are being perhaps a little harsh on him, and he needs to be given a bit of a chance to be leader now that he's been elected? And a lot of what we saw was maybe posturing during the election campaign.
No, I don't think it's posturing at all. That's a trope that's been said for the last, year. When he was running for the primary, people said, oh, he'll pivot. When he was running for the general, they said he would pivot. What has happened is that Trump has pivoted the country to his philosophy and more importantly, to the philosophy of the people backing him. Certain things that were just unthinkable in America are now being peddled to us as normal. They're often not reported on the news or emphasized. Things like the rise of open white supremacy in the White House, the appointment of Steve Bannon. And again, if you just look at what Trump is actually doing in terms of his financial arrangements, he's not fulfilling any promises he made to the electorate in terms of things that will be beneficial, like bringing about jobs. In fact, he's proposing to massively eliminate overtime pay, but it is doing things that clearly enrich him. He's partnering with dictators around the world. To be quite blunt, I don't think we have the time for a second chance. People keep talking about 2018, or they're talking about 2020. I'm really not sure that the America we have now will resemble the America we had at that time. Once an autocrat gets into power, it's very easy for them to rewrite the rules. All it takes is some sort of catastrophe to cause an emergency, action that can be made into law. And so I don't think our system of checks and balances can necessarily...
We're running out of time. I want to ask you one more question. We are seeing throughout the world this sort of rise of this strongman-style leader from Moscow to Budapest and so on. Do you think there is an appetite around the world for this sort of leader at the moment?
I think that the world has been in a very vulnerable place for the past 15 years, and especially for the past 8 years since the recession. I think people have been suffering economically, and we've also been suffering as a result of the wars that were led by America in Iraq and Afghanistan. When that happens, when the system breaks down like that, it is very easy for a demagogue, for an authoritarian leader to come in using populist rhetoric and brutal policies, and especially when you have the kind of money that a lot of these leaders have, and manipulate the population. It doesn't end well. It's very bad for democracy. It's very bad for people's daily suffering. And so, yes, I do think this is a worldwide crisis, and you can see it in who Trump aligns himself with, which includes the most right-wing and extreme elements of European politicians, as well as dictators in Russia and in other parts of the world. So, yes, this is a worldwide problem. What happens to us in the United States will affect you as well.
Okay, Sarah, many thanks for joining us and your thoughts today. Sarah Kendzior joining us there from Missouri.